or to critically question,
also. You know, so that is been, you can say it's been manifested in our decision-making process also. I mean, this is the culture that we should be changed.
Rukshana, this is the thing, you know, whenever there is, in this country, whenever there is a government in power, the incumbents always have abused state resources come re-election time. It is not, in that sense, a new phenomenon. The extent that these elections and the campaign period might be much larger or different to previous elections, but we have always seen from Wayamba to the provincial level, to provincial council elections, the abuse of state resources by the incumbents in power, and not just this government as well. Now, how do you really, in terms of the future, that systemic problem of the abuse of state resources by, at the end of the day, people we put into power, not to abuse, but as our representatives, that systemic problem, irrespective of who is the executive, that how do you address that systemic problem, Rukshana?
I think we have to identify this as a problem to begin with. I was talking to some of my friends when we first started the PPPR program, and who belonged to the educated crowd in Sri Lanka, and they also didn't understand. They thought at the beginning, yes, the government who is in control can use the public property because they have the control over it. But some of them actually have failed to understand there's a difference between the public property and the property and the finance of a particular political party. So I think to begin with, what we have to say, if we are to address this systemic issue, this is a problem. Right? And then once we identify this is a problem, but still, unfortunately, we didn't see in the last election, at least the principal candidates have failed to identify this as a problem. Right? So once you identify this as a problem, then of course we have to think what are the processes that you are going to introduce. I think in terms of that, what is most important is the transparency standards to show what are the finances of political parties and to what extent that you show your respect, due respect to the law and order of the country.
Do you need new legislation in terms of campaign funding and financing and transparency in that regard, or will a broad umbrella of right to information legislation cover it?
Of course, right to information...
Or is there existing legislation that can be leveraged?
Definitely, the right to information should be introduced, where we can ask information from public authorities. But then if a particular party is a private entity, that may close doors in getting information, unless if our law, which is going to be introduced, going to have the element of right to information, and Sri Lankan law is going to introduce and public interest element in obtaining information. So in that case, it might not cover the political party financing. So therefore, we may need laws for political parties to declare, given the interest of the in the interest of the public, to enact laws in that regard.
Now, in the absence of that, if I understood correctly from some discussions we had before the recording, the TI did go to public authorities and try to get this information, but you hit firewalls and stone walls, right? I mean, this was not there, or they didn't want to share it, or basically there is no pro bono intent in public authorities. They're always very fearful, or they just don't want to give it out, is it?
Yeah, there's a huge lack of apathy on their part to become proactive. We asked for information from the election commissioner, with due respect to a lot of work that he has done to assure free and fair election, and we haven't got any response from him.
So there's absolutely no response.
How many people have declared assistant liabilities in 2005 presidential election, and how many people have declared in 2010 election, and we actually want to do a comparison in terms of course, the people who have competed in 2005 or already competed in 2010 also. He has this information, but those are not in the public domain, unfortunately.
Are those official secrets, are they? No. I mean,
in general, some of the candidates have declared them in the newspapers, but
we have no information. But again, I mean, even say, if you take the argument to its logical conclusion, even if some candidates do declare in the media, there's no way of verifying that, whether it's accurate or not.
Of course.
So it's not as if you can publicly declare in the media, which makes that more believable, right? I mean, because you don't have it on an authoritative source.
Yeah. So there's no source of verification.
There's no source of verification. Now, coming back to the reports that you put out, there was some very interesting findings with regard to the use of and abuse of state media. What was the nature of this? I mean, we have seen it in the past, but this election campaign was particularly
We could see it both qualitatively and quantitatively.
Yeah.
When you see qualitatively, you could see a lot of programs in state media. I must say SLBC as well as Rupohini and ITN, and they produce programs which clearly geared towards supporting one candidate. So if we analyze the content and the way that the programs are handled by the announcer, the person who is comparing, we could see they have generally, in addition to the abuse of state resources, have failed to adhere to ethics of journalism.
Yeah.
Right? So basically we could see that they were one-track programs, and they have intended to, it was...
no, go ahead.
No, we could see even it was rather the announcer has prepared a set of questions to meet a certain set of objectives in the program.
No,
so at the problem is that, of course, you can have that kind of program, but have you given the same opportunity to the other candidates as well?
But that is what I was going to ask. The Elections Commissioner came out with guidelines, I think in December, and aren't these then a flagrant violation of the guidelines issued by the Elections Commissioner himself?
They are clear violations of guidelines given by the Election Commissioner, and he clearly said no state media or in general media shouldn't support a particular candidate in the election. So you can see again a complete disregard to the law and order. As I said, qualitatively, quantitative also, especially in state media, when they were allocating time, not only for the interviews and other programs, but even in news, there was very little coverage for the opposition candidates at that time. Right? So you could see they have blatantly disregarded the law and order, and then of course there's a competent authority appointed by the Election Commissioner, and even the competent authority made it completely became a failed affair. So the question is, this is your previous question comes to the surface. When there's a complete disregard by these people, public authorities, for the law and order of this country, then of course it is vested with the public to demand it again and again and again. So it's extremely important how public is going to react in this kind of situations. Because it's, as I said, basic premise is public money, public resources which have been used for a particular political agenda.
Does it undermine the legitimacy of the incumbent, given that this has been such a campaign marred by violence, marred by the abuse of state resources, marred by not just murder, but just looting and arson? Election monitoring agencies have likened this, unfortunately and quite sadly, to elections that have been very, very violent in the past, such as in '99 in Wayamba. Given the nature of what we saw, what do you think the incumbent must feel? Does he feel that he owes something to the voting public, an apology or some kind of redress? I mean, how do you go about your new term based on a foundation that was so blatantly abusive of state resources?
When we were doing the PPPR program, we never wanted to influence people to take a particular decision, but rather based on our principles, promoting transparency and accountability, and promoting anti-corruption in the country.
Right, but this is a record.
Yeah, we want to expose corruption.
Right, but this is a record, an indelible record, if I might, because you put it out in the public. How does the incumbent now deal with? How does any incumbent deal with this?
I mean, so based on that, and I think given the amount of abuse of public resources, and judging by that, I wouldn't say that it was a fair deal, the last election. So on that note, with confidence I can say on my official capacity, it was not a free and fair election given the magnitude of abuse of resources. Then of course, these people, both the candidates, have in their manifesto a promise to make Sri Lanka a corruption-free state. So then of course they have to look back to the election campaign that they have run and then reflect on it and see, to prevent that, what are we supposed to do in our future elections as well as in generally in the country. That's why I said there are two things which are predominantly important. A, assuring the independence of the authorities which are to hold a free and fair election. B, that are necessary laws.